Welcome, everybody. It is October 20th for our continuous meetings of the School Building Committee. Just a reminder that this video or this meeting is being broadcast and recorded. Please remember to keep yourselves on mute when not speaking and raise your hands, and you'll be called upon when you need to enter discussion. All that being said, let's get started. So I did not receive any public comments or feedback for anything. Ms. Linville, did you? You did not either. All right, so we'll move right along onto our membership matrix. Mr. Garcia is going to discuss this with us a little bit now. And again, we're always just looking to continue that to ensure that we continue to have equal representation and many voices heard. Ms. Ramona Cotto had to resign. So Josh is going to lead us into discussion on that to see if we need to add some people to our committee. Mayor Garcia?
Thank you so much, Erin, and good evening, everybody. I don't know if you have it directly in front of you or if you've reviewed it already, the membership matrix. Maybe, Erin, if you want to just, if you can, I don't have I do have a share. Membership matrix.
It's in your agendas too, people, if you want to click on it.
Can everybody see that?
Yep.
So the whole purpose of this, really quick, we could just spend 3 minutes or so, if taking an opportunity to look at our membership makeup and its representation. We do have a meeting with somebody next week, somebody who lives in South Holyoke, kids in the school system, to see if whether or not she'd be interested in participating. If you look at the bottom here, you'll notice HPS connection, gender, generation, what ward they live in. If there's any observations that people have made that maybe perhaps we should do a better job on our end, finding folks to improve our representation in those areas. I just want to give folks an opportunity to share if there are any observations made.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to the discussion or questions or concerns they see with our current membership makeup?
I know the big thing for me is always the ward representation, and it looks like we're, obviously we got the most in Ward 7 with 3, and then 2 in 6, and then we have, what's the NA, Erin? Is that like don't live in the city but are stakeholders, I'm assuming?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then 1 across the board. That's our current representation makeup citywide. Our racial makeup here, we got 9 whites and 5 Latinos. The person we're going to review next week is a Latina, so that'll probably, if she does decide to join us here, she'll be number 6, but that was another area of observation there. But if there's any other focus that you guys, and maybe it's not now, maybe it's later, you want to email me or call me or text me or whatever the case, get a hold of me and share with me your thoughts of who you'd like to see at the table to have a stronger representative makeup in this matrix, please let me know.
Mayor Garcia, I'm curious, have we thought to try to, even though it's not required, but maybe to try to add some student representation? Like maybe we could reach out to the student government at the high school and get one of their kids to possibly sit on it. I always enjoy hearing from the student rep on the school committee. They always add some nice insight of things we didn't think about. So maybe it would be nice just to get a student rep to participate, even if they can't come to every meeting, just to hear our students' voices and what they thought about, their experience in our current schools.
I love the idea. Any thought on that, folks?
I think it's a wonderful
Anthony,
idea.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Collmore.
Mr. Callamore.
I think it's a wonderful idea that we get student participation because, they're the ones that right in the school right at the present time to focus on it.
I did want folks to know that we do seek student participation through, like Anthony met with the middle school cabinet yesterday, and we asked them a ton of questions about their middle school experience. So I'm not saying I'm against a student being in these fabulously exciting meetings, but we do seek them out in other ways too.
And I presented to the high school cabinet as well. So we had, I want to say like 10 students from both campuses, and we presented like where we were at in the rezoning process in the middle school building process, asked them what, middle schools they went to. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I will admit that we're going to struggle to find somebody that's going to be willing to meet every 2 weeks for this long and this late, but we can certainly put it out there.
Yeah, let's try and see if we can find anybody. It's a great idea. And if
We
it
could certainly
works out, great.
Yeah, we could certainly ask the
It's like,
students to nominate somebody.
Yeah. So if you went back to the student body, Anthony, the governing bodies there, and put it on them and say, hey, we want you to nominate somebody. If there is an interest, we'd love to have them to be at the table. Okay.
A secondary thought to that too is if the same student can't commit, like if they just sent a representation of the group and then that person could report back to the group. So even if we couldn't get the same student each time, at least we still had some representation from the student bodies.
And that'd be interesting, Anthony, like if you want to encourage, and us being where we are and we're empowering our students in these governing roles, what we can do is say, hey, we want you to go to this meeting and we want you to report back to the body, your colleagues, the students, where we are at and what direction, you know what I mean? And then that way it gets them to start engaging. We could do that. The other thing is, Jamie, is this your first meeting? Okay, so everyone's already.
That's my second meeting, yeah.
Okay, all right. So
Yeah, thank you
everyone's up
though,
to date.
Here
Mayor.
last time.
All right, great. That was my piece. Thank
All
you,
right,
Aaron.
well, thank you, Mayor Garcia. If nobody has any further discussion on that or thoughts, we'll move on. Keeping in mind, you can always email myself, Ms. Linville or Mayor Garcia on the side if you have more thoughts you'd like to add to the discussion. All right, so moving on, Margaret is going to help us discuss the next steps with the model school process. As you guys know, you were asked to submit some questions as well. So now we're gonna work on that and go over what we want to see in the interview process and all that fun stuff with Margaret. Margaret, you have the floor.
All righty. So just to give you a couple of updates. So we had the designer site visit today at 10 a.m. Unfortunately, we had a great day for it. And it was Whitney and Aaron and myself. We had 3 designers come. So one was Jones Whitsett, who you will remember as the architect for the previous project. One was a firm called Mount Vernon Group, and one was a firm called Flansburgh. And I'm just going to steal the screen for a minute. I thought it might be good. I would definitely encourage you all to take a look at their websites when you have a minute. We're not going to spend time on this tonight, but just to let you know. So the other 2 firms who were invited, Danisco Design and Raymond Architecture, they have declined. They've written and said that they do not think that their model schools are a good fit for this project. So we have 3. So this is Flansburgh's website. I just want to show you this so you can find the spelling. Mount Vernon Group, this is them, and then Jones Whitsett. So again, we're not going to spend time on this tonight, but I would definitely encourage you to take a look and get a little bit familiar with their websites. So we had the site visit. The materials are due next week. We're going to get them out to everybody, mostly as digital copies, but if anybody needs hard copies, they can let me know. And then we are scheduled to have interviews on, Aaron, it's November 3rd, correct? It's the night.
No, we're reviewing them. So I think the materials are due in 2 weeks.
Okay.
We're reviewing them
On the 3rd.
On the 3rd, and then we're going to decide who to invite. And then the November 17th meeting is the one where we will interview.
Right. And I think at this point, the MSBA is going to expect us to interview anyone who submits. but it's still possible that one of the three might drop out. So I'll keep you in the loop about that. I think we should plan on 3 interviews. And I think I typically recommend that we spend about 50 to 55 minutes per interview. So essentially a total of 3 hours, followed by some discussion. What we're going to talk about next is in terms of the format for the interview. I typically give all 3 architects a couple of questions that we want them all to respond to in their presentation. And then we keep a second set of questions for the question and answer. So, typically in an interview, I would ask people to limit their formal presentation to 15 to 20 minutes. And then we would have about 25 to 30 minutes for questions and answers. And it's the Q&A period where you really get a sense of, how it feels to sort of have a back and forth with a client. They will be bringing to the interviews the people who are on the team. So you'll actually get to meet the people who are going to be with us. So, Erin, I think what we wanted to do then was to toggle to the list of questions that were submitted and talk about those. So let me just see if I can open this now.
I just sent it to your Gmail.
Oh, great. Oh, they're there. Okay. Super. So let me look at the best. I'm gonna share. Just gonna tinker with the screen a little bit to make it a little more legible.
Okay, what if we just gave people 5 minutes to read them?
Oh, sure. Can everybody see the questions?
I'll put them up, and then most people can see them on their screen, and then for our group,
Terrific.
I'll share.
So just for clarity, these are the questions that members of this group submitted to you, right? As their thoughts and ideas?
Right.
And then Margaret, I'd be interested to hear from you, like if you feel like there's more specific talking points than what we've hit on so far that we want to ensure that we hit on.
Yeah, and I do have a couple of thoughts about that, but let's give everybody a chance to read what was submitted, and then we can talk through how to summarize.
do you want me to go back to any part?
I think I got to look at them all.
You do or don't?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Margaret, I think we're good inside this room for what it's worth.
Sorry, say that again.
I think this group is ready.
Okay. So first of all, I want to say I think these are some great questions, and there are a couple of themes here that I want to pull out in discussing them. So I think one theme that is an excellent question to ask everybody to address is the site and the complexity of the site. So I think what I'd like to do is to propose taking a couple of these questions and kind of rephrasing them into a single question. But many people submitted questions, as you all can see, about the challenges of the topography as it relates to adjusting a model school that was designed for a more or less flat site to the site. So I think that is definitely a great question. And I think even asking Jones Whitsett to talk about how their design address this would allow us to sort of have them all speak on a comparable topic. I also think looking at this, another question that I think is really important is the question about energy efficiency and renewable energy sources. We actually talked about that a little bit today on the site, and just to recap what all of you heard, what I think all of you know is that there is no gas service to the site, so the project is going to be an all-electric building. The model schools were not designed as all-electric buildings. That's actually a pretty new thing. The Jones Whitsett design was. So I think, again, there's an opportunity to get the model school folks to talk about how they would adapt it, and to get Jones Whitsett to talk about how how their design addressed this originally, and if they would make any changes now. An important piece to know that I would wrap into this question is that the building code is about to change in January, and it's going to ratchet up the required energy performance quite a bit. I believe I did ask Jones with this question, and they had anticipated a higher level of energy efficiency in their design. The model schools will have to be, the designs will have, the building envelopes will have to be modified to address that. So that's a great question to ask. That's definitely a good one. So we've got sort of site design, we've got energy efficiency.
I think secondary to the energy efficiency too is like, is there room for improvement? Like, can we suggest solar if solar is not part of their plan, and then how would that impact the cost?
Mm-hmm. So there's two parts. So there's how to adapt.
A lot of people suggested asking about, being a sustainable, not just efficient, but sustainable as possible for the future. So
yeah. Okay, so got that topic.
I kind of think, sorry.
Go ahead.
It's okay, Jamie, go ahead.
Spaces. So lots of, whether it be art spaces, mental health spaces, green spaces. So some type of question about other than the obvious classrooms, cafeteria, everything that people associate with schools, what type of different spaces are going to be available,
Mm-hmm.
Because it was kind of a theme, different spaces for whatever. So just other, in their plans, what type of different, unique or inviting.
Yeah. So Jamie, just so you're aware too, so we submitted, I know this all happened before you got here, hon, but we submitted an educational plan, which basically outlines to them more or less like what our goals are for the school as a whole. So it kind of outlines like the different spaces that we would be looking forward to having incorporated in the space.
Okay.
So I'm sure Ms. Linville can send you a copy of that, so that way you can get a little updated on that. So they kind of have to follow what we're looking for, but it's still a great question to ensure and make sure that they're going to incorporate what we're looking for into the design, of course.
And Aaron sent me a ton of stuff, so I probably have it. I've been like going through watching old meetings, like as you know, so I haven't gotten there yet. But thank you.
And don't ever hesitate to reach out with questions.
Thank you.
Well, and honestly, Jamie, it's a great question. I feel as though it should be the first question. So the very first thing they should do in the interview is to walk us through their building plans and talk about how it matches or anywhere it doesn't match what your building program is, which requires them to digest your building program and be knowledgeable about it and then comment on it. So we will actually ask them to start with that. And to be honest, I think what's going to happen is there will be lots of questions about that we'll want to talk about in the Q&A period, right? So we'll want to kind of go through it. People will need to make notes. And then when we do the Q&A, I think depending on what gets presented, people will be like, can you talk a little, you mentioned this, can you talk a little bit more about that as part of the Q&A? Let's see. There's also a question here about natural light. I think it is a great question, but I think that question I would save for the Q&A period, because it's really, I think the thing you want to ask them is, what's your process going to be for how you're going to incorporate natural light? And it's a little bit easier to do in a conversational way than to sort of ask them to present something, because everybody, otherwise everybody says like, oh yes, everything will have lots of natural light, right? It's more of a process question. So I would keep the natural light, but I would make it as a question about that's in the kind of more loosey-goosey Q&A discussion. I also see a couple of questions about the MSBA cap on construction cost. And without getting into the weeds too much, what the MSBA, they have various caps on what they'll reimburse on. And in the case of the model school program, they cap how much they'll reimburse on the model school fee. Now, the assumption is the model school fee is going to be potentially lower than a fee where someone still has to do all the design, development, construction documents, but the MSBA is also capping it. I would not ask people to present on it. Again, I would ask that question during the Q&A, and I want to think a little bit about the best way to phrase this. There's on 10, there's a couple of sort of different versions of this, and this is Whitney's question, and it's a good one.
Margaret, if I could pause you, I'm going to let Mr. Lubo go forward with his question.
Sure.
Margaret, I just had a quick question. Will the participants get the questions before the meeting?
So what I typically do is I give them the questions that we want them to present on.
Okay.
And then I sometimes also say, you are likely to get a question during Q&A on X, Y, and Z. If it's something like this thing about the cap, I think they should think about what they're going to say. So that might be one. I don't, because the Q&A, so some building committees are very, very structured about this. They write a set of questions for Q&A and they ask everybody the same questions. I am not a fan of that, because I think that in this case, you're actually seeing real designs that you haven't seen before, and you're having to learn. And I think the questions are like, we need a little more flexibility on the questions. So we'll
Yeah, I don't-
definitely tell them what we want them to present on.
Okay, I was just thinking of the time frame. Some of them could be pretty intense to answer, like how are you going to adapt your site to the unique area that we have. That could be a long answer,
Mhm.
but if they knew maybe before, they might just be
Yeah.
able to be more on point to be able to deliver that quicker, so we can have more of that Q&A back and forth going forward.
Yeah.
That's all
No,
I was thinking.
They actually, it's one of the fundamental things that's built into what the MSBA is asking them to respond to in their written response.
Okay.
So we'll see something about it in the written response, but I think then it's still good to have them talk about it,
Oh,
because
sure.
for part of it is some people have easier time reading plans than others. Some will have more time to look at the written stuff. So I think we want them to talk about it, but they'll be anticipating that, Mark.
Okay, as long as they're anticipating those type of questions. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
And
So
then Mark, one point I saw in the questions that we haven't really discussed, I mean, we did a little bit, but like the pain points that they see in adapting their model to fit our needs.
yeah, exactly.
And that to me should be like back and forth maybe, as opposed to a presented ahead of time question. But definitely something to discuss. And then, not to discuss this right now, but curious, like what happens if we don't find that any of them really fit our plan and what we want to see moving forward?
Mhm. Well, that's the judgment call that the committee will make after the interviews, which is
So like, how will that look for the MSBA if we like decide that the model schools just don't work for what we need, or if their site plan adjustment makes it like, is there the chance that the site plan adjustment from their ideal school that they have is going to skew the numbers in such a way that it doesn't even make doing a model school effective? Like, it's
well, so
it's hard to like wrap my head around the differences that we're going to see in the designs for this versus the difference of the design we already have from the original designer for the site that we're looking at. So at what point do we get past this if it doesn't work out to be able to go back to this? Or is Joan Witz going to present us this because we already liked it, but it's not one of their model schools, so they can't, correct?
Well, their Joan Witz's challenge is different because they already have designed something for the site. But here's the way I think the MSBA is thinking about this, and the way you should think about this is that there is a design that is perfectly good for this site, but you haven't had an opportunity to measure that against other designs, right? This is a way to help you all become more educated about the design challenges by looking at what you would do if there was a different kind of design. What the MSBA wants out of this is a public conversation. So we have to have the dialogue when we decide on this. We're going to do it. We're going to do it in public. We're going to go around the room, and people are going to sort of talk about their opinions, and then to make a record of that. Right? They are not. If they did not believe that the Joan Witz project was a perfectly acceptable design for you all, it wouldn't be in the mix here, right? So you should think of it as an opportunity to understand other things that could happen at this site and to reflect on how those different options meet your vision of the project and then articulate it. That's actually the hard part sometimes, and it really helps to do it as a group, to go around, because sometimes someone will be able to articulate something that someone else was thinking, right? So it's not, that's all the MSBA is looking for, is that you all as a committee have an opportunity to see alternates and make a informed decision about moving forward with whoever you decide to move forward with.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what I'm hearing you say, is Jones Whitsett presenting to us the current design they already designed for us, or are they going to be presenting to us a different design within their portfolio?
I anticipate that they will present the previous design. They will probably talk about some of the commentary that resulted in how they got to it. And they may also say, now that we have a chance to go back to this, here are some other things that might happen here. I think that I'm not going to say they should do that, but they might choose to do that. Right.
So hypothetically speaking, we possibly, hypothetically, could end up with the original design, but under the structure of the model school program, which would essentially save us money, no?
So I think if you're talking about saving money on the fees, I would say no. And the reason is that the fees they're talking about is the work that the model school designers have already done to do what's called design development and construction documents, to create bid documents. If you look at the totality, so the 100, the pie chart of what a designer's fee is, about 20% of their total fee is typically design development, and about 40% of their fee is construction documents. Mm-hmm. So Jones Whitsett has not yet invested the 60% of a typical fee to do that. And that is why the MSBA would not cap their fees in the same way they are proposing. Well, their rule is that they cap. If you go to the model school designer, they have to adjust their design. And the MSBA believes that should be done cost effectively. Just to get into the weeds a little bit, they are not saying that the fee should be what the cap is. They're just saying they're going to pay a smaller percentage.
Okay.
So
and then there is, if we ended up with a model school, I think Mayor Garcia, correct me if I'm wrong, but the MSBA would then be reimbursing us for some of the feasibility study. No, isn't that, Tony, you might know the answer to this too. I know that there was discussion that in our feasibility study money was not going to be covered by the MSBA. But if we went model school, the feasibility study might be slightly more, but then there can be some reimbursement on that fee particularly. Am I recalling that correctly?
So that's not correct.
Okay.
That's definitely not correct. The MSBA is not going to reimburse you any part of your feasibility study money.
Okay. Okay. Not sure where I remembered that from, but thanks for the clarity.
Yeah.
And that was something in our conversations with Jack that he had brought up. So, Margaret, maybe unless you already have clarity from the MSBA, I know that was mentioned as part of the conversation of why we should entertain the model school process.
Okay, well, we should go back and ask that question in writing.
Yeah.
At least I know I'm not crazy. I know I heard it somewhere.
I mean, to be honest, Aaron, nobody's asked me this question before, but it's not their, typically they don't reimburse at all if you're sort of going back through part of this process a second time, right, up until the point that you are moving forward.
I just curious if anybody else on the committee besides myself, who clearly has been at this for a while, is still just slightly confused on the benefit with going with a model school versus the school we want, or did not want, because I can't speak for the committee, but the school that the committee decided early on we would pursue. So I understand, that we're going through this process. We want to get the best options out there and make sure that we do what's feasible. But in the end, what are if like, let's pretend it's the first meeting again, I don't know, but what is the benefit if we end up with a model school versus if we end up saying no to model schools and go back to the original design? Like,
The designer savings and time.
And also, Aaron, I think the intent too was to make sure that no stone.
oh, I agree with you there. I'm just
So it was
curious
a
at
good,
the end, what
a good faith effort to look into it, because
absolutely.
there was thought that there might be a potential savings in money and time to, as Mr. Lubel just reiterated there.
I mean, I do agree with the time piece. And a lot of times, communities that choose the model school process choose it because of time. So if, going back to my little pie chart, if 60% of the time there are modifications that need to be made. So design development, that phase is usually 4 to 6 months, and construction documents is usually 8 to 10 months. So if you're starting from scratch to do that, let's call it 14 months. If you're making modifications to drawings, let's say it's 4 to 6 months. So if you were, if time were the only issue, you would be crazy not to do the model school process.
Gotcha. Mr. Lubel, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think we maybe need to ask that question. After visiting the site and giving your plans, are there truly that time savings? And I don't know if that's part of their presentation on what they feel their time frame would be.
So that's my question that I don't see in these questions. We need to ask them to present at a kind of high level what they see as the timeline. And that will give you, Aaron, going back to your question, I think you have to think of this as an opportunity to kind of pressure test why you would choose anybody, right? And so this will be a real opportunity, because there will be a big difference in the schedule between the model school designers and Jones Whitsett. There are other differences, but that's a place where you'd be like, wow, that's really different. So one of the questions I want them to present on is schedule at a high level.
And so we would ask that as a forwarding question, right? So that they're
exactly. Yeah.
Jessica, you can go ahead, please. I see you unmuted, but we cannot hear you.
Hey, Jessica, you can also text me your question or put it in the chat if for some reason the audio is not working.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, sorry that we can't hear you, Jessica. We'll come back to you as soon as we see that question come through digitally. Does anybody have any other questions that they think that should be a point of discussion when discussing what questions we want to ask the designers?
Yes, if I can.
Yep.
I can go, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the essential question, giving our financial circumstances, I kind of I just slightly updated it. It was asked the previous time, and I think somebody else asked along the same lines, but what we call cost efficiency, how the design would minimize cost by choice of materials. Would it maximize state reimbursement? Something along those lines. I think it was put well in that previous set of questions. As I said, I just slightly updated. I think that for our community, I think that's an essential question.
Is that Dave who's speaking?
Yes.
It is.
Yes. Back here in the.
You're about a quarter of an inch tall on my screen, so I'm glad I recognize the voice.
And then to piggyback that too, like maybe asking like if they're concerned about increased costs moving forward, and what I don't know the right term, but what variable, what allowances are they leaving for overages in construction materials as costs continue to rise. What would you call that, Margaret? I know there's a term for it.
It's contingency. You guys are going to get tired of
Thank you.
me talking about contingency. So, you know, the process that the designers would all relate in response to this question is there's a process of drawing, estimating, and establishing contingencies for the things that, like escalation, that you are speculating about. They'll have, you know, pretty similar responses to that. But I think, Dave, to your point, and there, you know, there's several iterations of this. I think the question is, for me, back to you all, is this really important question about how you would be cost effective, something you want them to present on, or something that you want to talk about during the Q&A. And if it were up to me, which it's not, I would do it as a Q&A question because I think it's something that wants to be a little more conversational. I just don't want to get in a situation where you're hearing kind of the same, it will sound the same from all three of them, like, we'll be really careful. We know what things cost, right? I think it might be better. It's really important to talk about, but I think I might do it during Q&A.
That just to follow up, Margaret, maybe we could ask them to present a little bit on that, and then we could ask them follow-up questions.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just,
Oh,
that'll be
sorry,
also,
Mark.
I'm sorry.
That's
That'll-
okay. Sorry, I saw Kathy's hand, but you can go first, and then I'll
No.
call on Kathy.
Kathy can go. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay.
No,
Sorry,
my
Ms.
bad.
Well, Kathy, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm gonna share with you something that I found, and I think it's gonna be like useful for everyone. And it's basically some questions about what criteria we need to consider when asking questions when people is building new schools. So it basically include like 10 headlines about you can open it, the document, but basically it's identifying the context, site plan, school design, organization, and include like different other questions to consider. And I think it's gonna be like really helpful for us to actually ask the question we need. So I think if we have like a little hard time to, you know, consider the question that we need to ask, we can go through the document when we have time and basically find other useful questions. Thank you.
That's really great, Kathy. Thanks for sharing that. Ms. Linville, can you share that with the committee?
Yeah, I just put it in the notes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Mr. Lubel?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it would be good also for the previous architect to talk about maybe some materials or new materials that they've found or seen since the design that might lower the cost, or where they see that there also could be savings as well.
Totally agree.
Mr. Collmore also has a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Rodney.
Yeah, the public has a concern over entrances and exits to the school, the widening of the streets, no parking on the streets. Is there going to be an access to fire, police, ambulances, or something like this? Is it going to be completely around the building? How many parking places are going to be needed for 550 people in that school at one time? The reason I'm asking this is because the public over the years, and many years, along McIntosh Terrace, instead of them parking along the way they do, just go in another 10 feet on the ball field area and make it angle parking, and we could pick up 40 or 50 spots just in that area there, rather than around the school area. It's just something that the public is really interested in, is public parking. And
So, Mr. Collmore, I think taking any space from the park is more of a city issue because, as you know, to take any amount of parkland, you have to duplicate it times 10. And there actually is, I don't think lack of parking has ever been the issue at Peck. I think people park at McIntosh because it's more convenient, and they don't want to deal with the parking lot. But, parking design is definitely something to take into consideration. I think something that can be discussed at the Q&A, Margaret, if you thought that was appropriate.
Well, so I think what I would do is, I'm in a minute, I'm going to show you what I'm kind of condensing this down into. But we are asking them to speak about how they will adapt the building for the site as part of their presentation. And what Mr. Collmore is talking about is a piece of that. So I would be a little more specific in writing the question and say, how will you adapt your building for the site, including entry, exit, parking, safety, fire department access?
Yeah,
because it's sort of, you have to approach it synthetically, and they have to do this work. I mean, there's no point in them coming saying, look at my fabulous building, it'll work on the site. Like, that's part of why they're in the model school program, is that this is part of figuring it out. So I'm totally good with kind of asking them to be specific about how they respond to that.
Thank you. Mr. Tallman?
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Getting to that issue with Mr. Collmore, I think we did discuss that in the city council a couple of years ago about the parking. But as you said, taking part of that Crozier Field, that you have to multiply that somewhere else. But I think the neighborhood, if we have some type of a community meeting, I think it's important for the people on, McIntosh and Sherwood and that whole area, because, with the school being in there and the number of students, I think, that's something that definitely safety and parking and especially we have to take the neighborhood into consideration with this new building if it does get through there.
More than 500. Yeah. You could pull it up.
Aaron, can you just repeat that question so that the rest of the community can hear it?
More than 500 students now in that building between Holyoke Middle and Peck Middle School.
I think the main parking concerns too are usually around pickup, not so much drop off. Maybe we could even, I don't know if Mr. Tallman, if a solution could be some no parking signs between this time and this time, if that would even lighten the load or if people would just disregard those. But I know that would be a city council thing that we could get done.
Right. I mean, especially with the pickups of the students, as some of the other schools, you see the lined up Vermont Street or Jarvis Avenue. Sometimes you go by there's 50, 100 cars. So that's an issue. I think that's got to be discussed too.
Thank you.
Yeah, 581 students last school year. So it's about a similar size.
Yeah, but as it's always been a concern with the neighbors, it's definitely something that we want to anticipate questions on when it does come time for public meetings in the neighborhood. So.
Oh, yeah.
It's not so much the students, it's the number of teachers who will actually be driving their cars there.
But
I think the issue has to do more with it's student pickup and drop off and the parents that line McIntosh Terrace waiting for their students, as opposed to pulling in the parking lot and doing it, the way that they should. I think that's, I don't know that teachers and staff park up there, but I think it's definitely the most of a concern at student pickup time.
I have Jessica's question. Is there is there any limitation aside from the cost aspect to modifications we can make to the model school design as opposed to making on our own design?
It's a very good question.
It is a great question. It's my understanding there's no limitation. The limitation, if there is one, going back to the timeline. So the more changes you make to the model school, the more design time there is, and therefore the more overall time, and therefore probably the higher the model school designer's fee. But again, that if it seems like in all other respects a really good fit, but you see as a committee something that's like, this would like completely work for us if you just changed that. Yes, there's nothing that's off the table in terms of that. I mean, as appropriately, right? I mean, these buildings were designed for other communities, in many cases for other grade configurations. I mean, it's there's no constraint there.
I think that's my biggest concern with the presentations that we're going to receive is just with the configuration of the school itself having all been built as grade schools.
Well, or a high school, right? I mean, it's really important to understand there are no middle schools in the model school program, which is why the schools that have been selected, I'm, to be honest, not entire. I think what the MSBA probably looked at was the total number of students and the total number of classrooms, and that was where these came from. So they weren't designed for this particular population, which isn't to say they can't be adapted, which is why that's a great question.
And if they get adapted, then they'll have a model school for a middle school.
Or Jones-Witzik gets selected and that becomes a model school.
Yeah. Kathy, did you still have a question? I know you had your hand up, but put it down.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about parking at Peck. At the moment, recently I was there in an activity that we have for Gear Up in the school, and I noticed like there were a lot of teachers like parking side to the street, you know, like it has like a rotary or something, so there were a lot of cars in there, and also where the gentleman says, and I think it's because it's near, if they had like more access to the school as opposed to walking all the way back down to the school, and I think that's the reason they park there, and they occupy like those spaces just because it's a long walk to do from the where the parking is to the school. It's more about like an access theme.
Thanks, Kathy, for that feedback. So it might be who to see if they have plans to have parking like more around the building as opposed to all in one side like it is now, so that teachers feel like they have closer access points. All right, does anybody else have any questions or concerns or thoughts or comments they want to add to this discussion? Margaret, did you have anything further you want to review with us?
So what I want to propose here, I've typed up my version of these questions. We're, as Aaron Linville pointed out, we're going to be getting back together to look at the applications, and there will be 2 weeks before the interviews. So what I'd like to propose is I'm going to show you these, I'm going to share them, and then when we meet on the 3rd, we can revisit them and see if we want to tinker with them. But this will be a starting point. Does that sound okay? Okay, so I'm just very quickly.
Sorry, Margaret, 1 second. Jamie has a question.
Just for clarity, so and those 5 questions that we all read already, the 5 that were with the letter, they are going to be addressing those 5 questions, and then the ones we're coming up with now are in addition to those.
Yeah,
just because like like the second or third one is about design and traffic flow and crowds and things like that. So I just want to make sure that if they already have these 5 and they're preparing on it, we are timed, restraints. Not to be repetitive in the process.
No, it's a great point, and I am not making any attempt in this conversation to merge them, but there is
okay.
overlap. What I want to do is show you what I captured from tonight, and then I'll come back and kind of merge those, because again, we don't want this to turn into something where they need 40 minutes to present and we only have 10 minutes to talk with them. So
I didn't know if those 5 questions that the interviewers said they got, if those were a definite go. So they're already prepared to kind of touch upon those. So, okay.
So
all right, thank you.
Those are the MSBA standard, but I think some of these things sort of, what I think I may do is just rephrase them a little bit to capture the Promises community. So I'm going to make this a little bigger on the screen.
And Margaret, in the interview, who asks the questions?
So it would be great if you all ask the questions. What we don't have to, as for the presentation nobody has to ask them. They're going to have the questions ahead of time. They can kind of take them in whatever order. They're just going to make a presentation. But for the Q&A period, that's totally up to you. If someone, I would say it's an excellent opportunity if someone is particularly passionate about a particular question, that they be the one to ask it. But we can talk about that also at our next meeting. And there other questions may emerge in the process of looking at the applications together. So the questions that I think they should talk about in their presentation are these 5. And again, kind of merged in with the MSBA's. So building program, present your building plans and talk about how they would be adapted to our educational program, right? The site, how will you adapt your building for the site, including entry, exit, parking, safety, fire department access? Provide a schedule laying out your approach to, I should say, the project. You can see I typed this all really fast. Energy source and energy efficiency. How will you adapt your design to be all electric? What are our options within your design for reaching the highest level of sustainability? And then I think it's good to, as a sort of jumping off point for the Q&A, to ask them to just say a couple words about what they think the biggest challenges are. And it's a good lead into discussion, because they may say something that you're like, oh, hadn't thought of that. The questions that I would, for the moment, sort of pin for the Q&A, and again, I don't think we have to ask all of these, but these are great questions. How would you approach producing the most cost-effective project given our budget constraints? This one we didn't talk about, but I think we should ask this question. This is a question I would recommend. We have a multicultural community. Can you talk about your team's cultural and multilingual skills and experiences? Natural light, what is your design approach? MSBA caps on design and construction. How do you see this project responding to these caps to produce the highest value product? And then something that was a little bit embedded in this that I think is important to ask is approach to challenges for mental health, students with differing needs, gender neutral bathrooms, some of the challenges that come with a community that is a high poverty community and has kids with a lot of kind of, let me call them sort of urban kid challenges. The population tends to have more of those kinds of challenges, which makes it very different from the schools that some of these model schools were designed for, if you look at where they were built originally.
I know some of the conversations we had early on too is like, you know, maybe space for like a community laundry room, which would highly benefit our students. Space for a community pantry that could highly benefit our students. Something like that. So I don't know that this would be like a direct question, but something to consider when we're having open discussion. You know, I mean, I know I would love as a community member to see some of that. You know, we've read studies about how impactful that can be for the student population. You know, we have kids that don't come to school because they don't have clean jeans, where if we could help eliminate some of those barriers for students to be able to come to the building. And then of course, like after school clubs and, you know, all kinds of stuff like that with space.
Yeah. And, you know, I think you're going to find, Whitney will remember that the Jones-Witts in the previous project, we also talked a lot about that. It's a challenge because the MSBA won't reimburse on those spaces. But for instance, the Jones-Witts design did embed a small parent center that had a washer and dryer, and I don't think it had a shower, but it was also a place that could be flexibly used for physical health treatments. Like people could come there and, an outside entity could come in and do checkups and dental treatments and things like that. So, I mean, this is, I think, is a really important part of urban schools. And I think you will hear a very different response between these designers to a question about how you serve those kids.
Yeah, for us, a school in this community is also a community center, not just a school.
Definitely.
Yeah, Margaret?
Yeah.
Maybe just in that last question, you said it, but if you could maybe write it in, challenges for an urban district as opposed to a suburban district.
Exactly.
It's not, you said it, but it's not really clear from reading that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'm gonna edit these a little bit before I send them out. But is there, just so we don't take up the whole night doing this, did I miss anything in those questions? And remember, we'll be back at this in 2 weeks and we can do a checkup. But does that seem like it captured the main concerns?
Margaret, one thing I'm wondering if people are interested in is, like, you've talked about the multilingual or multicultural community, but I always find when I interview people asking, like, why do you want to build a school in Holyoke? What's your connection or interest to this community? Something like that. Like, I think you get a sense of how much people know and understand who you are, and that can impact kind of timeliness and their ability to work with us. I'm curious if other people think that's useful or not in this case.
I think it's a great question to have in the open dialogue portion of the interview.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually a really good kind of last question to ask, because it gives people an opportunity to kind of sum up, you know, the conversation back and forth. So thank you, Erin. Yeah, that's a good one.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the back and forth that you had earlier, Erin Brunel, in regards to the questions you were brainstorming on, and that was very reflective. And I appreciate your involvement there to try to keep pace with this octopus here, because it has so many different facets to it, and it is a challenge. What the MSBA, in my opinion, is representing to us now with the model school program, and I appreciate the time to consider this before the group, is the fact that they have pre-selected architectural firms based on their experience and their review of actual designs, of which are historic and could be utilized. And some of these designs have been repeated, one high school in particular, 10 to 12 different times by different communities. Now, it's great if you have a beautiful pasture land somewhere and you don't have a brownfield condition, you don't have, different challenges with environmental concerns or existing structures and so forth, and you can just drop this beautiful structure on there, but that's not what we're talking about here now. So what the MSBA has tried to do, and this is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to provide communities with an opportunity to benefit from other communities' involvement in this process. Now, anybody can design, and I will tell you that Flansburgh and the other company that was present, aside from Jones Witz, Flansburgh did Chicopee Comp and Chicopee High. If you've ever driven by those or been into those, gorgeous facilities. Okay, there's no question about it. But the MSBA now, I have a little conundrum here myself, Aaron, in regards to exactly what the MSBA is presenting, because they are presenting to us a program of which is pre-procured, which involves specific financial caps in regards to engagement. Now, we already have presumed and assumed, because they've gone through all the hurdles with the MSBA, that these are fine companies. No question about it. But we're trying to obtain value in this process. And therefore, Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it 4.5 or 4.75 is the cap for service from any representative selected to be in the model program?
I think it might be 4.5, Whitney. It's right smack.
I thought so too. So what that means is that's what we should expect to pay them in order to get to the next phase. So if it is so challenging for them, And some firms have already backed out for various reasons of which we are not aware. Is it time? Is it current obligation? Is it complexity? We do not know. But right now, the reality is 2 alternate firms did show up of high caliber, very excited. But what is going to be the benefit to the community if we're looking to save costs, which is really what's going to bring this project home for us? I'm sure it'll be a nice project no matter what it is, but if we can't afford it, it doesn't matter. So the reality is that now, what is that margin? If they can't effectively design it for that 4.5%, we're talking every percent here could be $750,000. So if we get up to 8%, if we get up to 10%, we're talking about $3 to $4 million. Now, if that's the case, that margin, that delta, is not reimbursable to our community. We will have to pay for that ourselves. Am I correct in that, Margaret?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's huge. Okay.
Yeah.
And we will be reimbursed for Jones Whitsitt to our level of effective reimbursement, which is not 80% when it all shakes down. But
Yeah.
it still will be something that will minimize that delta. So I just want to be very clear in that. So I think question number 4 in the Q&A needs to be tightened up a little bit.
Yeah.
And we need to specifically address the fact that we're looking to actually find out and this is like a crystal ball moment for the companies to try to look at, oh boy, yeah, it is going to be pretty hard. And yeah, that code improvements, the elimination of fossil fuels, the integration of new technologies with heat pumps, the challenges with the topography. I mean, these are all things that we spent hundreds and hundreds of hours with the previous architect to shake all this down to the current design of which we already own. So that would be my comment, I think.
So let me comment that for the next meeting, I'm going to try to diagram this fee issue so that it's really weird and complicated, and I'm a totally visual person, so I think I need to make a diagram just for myself. Whitney, I know what you would like, which is you would like to ask them to estimate what their fee is. I don't believe we can do that. And
then they're going to do it. They're going to do it for 4.5 then.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, this was the issue that I brought up with the MSBA when we had our meeting, our prep meeting for this, was whether they could provide us with the prior fees for the school when it was designed before, so we could understand. But I really think if you want to ask that question, I need to ask the MSBA, because this selection process is, by state law, is supposed to be qualifications based, and you're really not actually allowed to ask people for fees as part of the decision making process. To
understand, but
rank,
that's not what they're presenting though. They're presenting a model program which has its own set of unique criteria, which in effect is pre-procured to us. That's why we can take advantage of those economic opportunities. So I would look. I'll take a look more at the 2015 memo from the MSBA, and also the notice to administrators for people attempting to utilize the program, and see if there can be any pre-collaboration or an awareness in regards to the vendors' forecast in relationship to anticipated costs, because it has to be acknowledged somewhere. Yeah. And if you get married to somebody, you don't, again, it's this whole notion of, holy cow, how did I buy into that? Also, there are some other constraints. I just want to say one other thing. I've heard from other builders, and I did talk to Fontaine on this, who was our last CM at risk, construction manager at risk. Apparently, a lot of the interior finishes and some of the, I wouldn't derogatorily say window dressing, but again, the effect that the building brings forward, if it has a rather elaborate aura to it, I don't think you're changing a lot of the interior effect. What might drive the cost up quite a bit in regards to some sensibilities that we may bring into that design to try to effectively economize on costs, that might have another tripwire. Well, the architect would go, holy cow, now they want me to redo the whole thing. So we have to be very careful in regards to what that actual model represents. And we have, you're almost committing to buy a structure of which, in hypothetical terms, is already designed. And so therefore, by saying yes, you do then agree to many of those preconceived notions of which are already cast in stone.
Yeah. I mean, just to be clear with everybody, so if you go through this process, you rank the three, assuming we're going to get three. You go and you negotiate with your top ranked firm, and if you cannot come to agreement, you go to the second, and if you can't come to agreement the second, you go to the third. So that's where this negotiation of fee occurs, is post interview, post ranking. So it's not that it doesn't happen, it's just there's a sort of order to it.
Mr. Lubel.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't necessarily think we can, ask them on the price part of it, but we certainly could ask on anticipated time, certainly compared to, if somebody built 10 of these model school programs, they have a pretty good feel of how much extra time they spent to, modify their designs to fit a certain community. Do they anticipate that here? After they've seen the site and deal with us for a few nights, I suppose. Do they anticipate their time being extended out compared to in the past? So time is money, and you can almost get to
Definitely.
it in a roundabout way.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a really good follow-up, Mr. Lubel. And Mr. Anderson, I just can't say how much I value all your knowledge through this process. It's just amazing. It's like a sponge, and there's just so much in there. I love it.
It's a dangerous place.
I mean, I try to digest as much as I can, but it's just so much. So, I just appreciate having you on board, and everyone, don't get me wrong,
And you,
but
you as well, and the rest of the group has just been delightful. The decorum, the give and take, the insight, everybody having their own specific avenue of expertise. It's a pleasure.
all right, Miss Wood, I'll let you continue. If not, we can move on to the next section of the agenda.
Yep, I think I'm good.
Our agenda grew by 4 pages because Miss Linville's so good at taking notes. Yes, Jamie.
Sorry, I just have one more question about the actual procurement.
Always welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So where we're at right now, we're looking at qualifications, but Margaret, I guess this is a question for you is, like after we go through the qualifications and these types of interview, the price point would be the next thing that we discuss. Is it qualifications based first, and then the price reveal is afterwards? And do we get to consider that?
So, so typically, and I think I would imagine you all would all agree that Whitney would be the best person to be in the room for this conversation. Typically, the negotiation with the designer is delegated to me with anyone else who wants to join in. So I would suggest that it would be Whitney and me, sort of having that conversation, then bringing back to you all our recommendation about it. I don't think it's something that is very easily done by committee, but I think when we get to the point that we have ranked firms, I think we know that, obviously Whitney and I know that price is the issue. And so I would want him to be satisfied that we had gotten the best deal. And it's certainly my role to make sure you get the best deal.
I appreciate that confidence, but I would ask for blessing from the superintendent and a conversation with him in regards to his desires and to make sure that, again, Anthony and I have a conversation 3 years ago, and he remembers the specifics of what we entertained at that moment. So there's a sharp character there, and I would want to proceed in regards to his best thoughts.
Okay.
Yes, Miss Deborah Vega.
Hi, good evening. So this is just a question regarding the questions that we're coming up with tonight. And I realize the first questions are going to be sent to the designers, but the follow-up questions for the Q&A, do we need to decide them for sure before the meeting? Or if we come up with a question the night of the interviews, can we go rogue and ask a question that we just thought of in the moment?
Well, again, different committees take different attitudes about this. I'm a big believer that you do need to be able to go rogue because it's your one shot at it. So if something comes up in the discussion or the presentation, you need to be able to ask the question. So yes, Deborah, that is, you may go rogue if you need to.
Thank you.
Hey, Margaret, I just got a question submitted by Wendy, which I agree with, is should we ask, when we talk about the building design, should we also talk about the safety features,
Yeah.
So we could add that to that question too.
Yeah. Got it. Check.
Thank you, Wendy.
So are we allowed to? Because I know, like, from a school committee perspective, when it comes to the safety of our buildings, those are conversations that we have offline. Because we don't want people to know too much about how we secure our buildings, right? Because then they could have the opposite effect. So is that a conversation that we want to have open dialogue with? Or do we want to have that more of a tight-knit conversation? I'm just, for clarity purposes, like, I know, like I said, on the school committee, we have security conversations offline.
Well, I think it's important to ask them to touch on in their presentation. I think you're going to find that they're all going to present something similar, which is to say, you don't have a single school now that's designed to the current standard, which is everybody's standard, which is a controlled entry point with visual observation and the ability to control the next step, how people get in. The next level, which is, what goes on within the school and how people exit in an emergency and all of those things, it's too early to talk about that here in this interview setting, because it's actually something that you develop in partnership with the local police department, and we're not their representatives, right? So I think in the presentation they can sort of explain that, and definitely you can ask a question about it. I will say it's one of the reasons that if you go to the MSBA website, good luck finding any of the model school plans. The MSBA does not publish building plans, and it is because it is considered a safety issue. So we have those building plans, but they go way, and actually the designers as well, you'll never see the building plans online, and that's because it is a way of ensuring that people don't know how the floor plan of a school works.
So vague questions, but when it gets down to the nitty-gritty specifics, once we're in building phase, just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, it will get developed in partnership with the safety officials in the city, as well as the school department.
All right, so pending no further discussion on the questions and the interview process, we'll move along to the next agenda item if nobody else has anything they'd like to add.
Great discussion, folks. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. All right, so moving on to working groups. I know a lot of the groups haven't been meeting as much because we hadn't felt the need. So academic and extracurricular, again, I think it's probably still a little premature for that, but I don't know if Ms. Glasheen is on and if she has anything she'd like to add to the conversation regarding her working group.
I don't think she's on, and she hasn't told me anything that needed to be added yet. But I could share that we have another middle grades team working to more in depth go into scheduling, and we just had a meeting tonight till 5:30 that was looking at some really good options that even better met the educational plan requirements, I feel like, than what we put in. So that's good work, and that should line up with that being like released by the end of this calendar year, which is in plenty of time for the designer.
Okay, great. Thanks for the information. And then communications, I see a note that Nicole Harrison had notified Miss Linville today that she needed to step down. We appreciate all the advice she's given along the way and look forward to her continued community activism. I know we haven't met officially as a group. As far as communication goes, there's a report about the school building committee in the update that the district sends out weekly to parents. I know that I had Mr. Soto give an update to the joint school committee city council meeting at our last meeting, which was just 2 weeks ago. And we give updates and reports at every single school committee meeting. If anyone has any ideas they'd like to share with future communication, obviously, I think once we select a designer, then we're going to really start probably meeting regularly again and ensuring that we're updating the community more frequently as the process moves forward. Ms. Linville, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
That was fabulous. Oh, I will add one thing. We do talk a lot about the middle school building project during all these rezoning meetings. And so it comes up frequently, and we're gathering input that way from what people want to see in the building too.
And just as an update to that, for those that aren't aware, the school committee actually has a retreat this Saturday. So we get to hang out from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. this Saturday, where we'll be diving in really hard to try to finalize our decision on not necessarily specifically which student will be in which building next year, but at least knowing which buildings will be housing, what grade configuration, where the new middle school will be, the secondary middle school will be next year. As you know, we have a lot of rezoning going on. If you guys want to follow along and get updates on that, you can visit the district website. The district did a really great job of having like different levels of presentations. There's like a really long video you can watch or a super short video you can watch, and you can either opt to dive into things really detailed or keep it kind of broad. But next week sometime, you'll be looking forward to an update from that about rezoning, which will really help us to know, what student population we could potentially be serving in this new building as well. So it's talked about often, I guess, is my point. So hopefully no one will be like, oh, this happened so fast, which kind of happened last time, even though it was talked about for 3 years ahead of time. Building design, Mr. Lubold, have you guys met or found any reason to meet yet?
No, we're just kind of in a holding pattern until we get a little further along here and maybe, get a designer on board and we can start having some good conversations.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then I'm assuming it's the same for finance, David, as there's really been no progress with where our financial forecast is at the moment. So I'm going to assume you are at the same position right now.
Yeah, we haven't met recently, but I'd like to meet sometime in the near future. We can try and see if we can come up with anything really out of the box as far as alternative options for financing.
I'm not sure how much.
Garcia should have a update for us. The city is working on a financial forecast. So we're hoping within the next 30 days that he'll be able to give us a little bit of a update at one of our meetings. And then maybe you could have a follow-up meeting or a preceding meeting about the topic.
I can't remember how much we've talked about this, but one of the designers today did say that they are building a school in Lawrence and that they were using ARPA funds to get the until more debt rolled off. They were using ARPA funds to pay for it in the beginning. And so, anyways, I just wanted to share that as something to possibly look into.
Some question about if they could be used or how they could be used.
It was the Lawrence.
Well, that's something we can look at.
Lawrence, the city of Lawrence CFO.
One of the other districts in receivership here in Massachusetts. Yeah. How ironic.
So, Erin, we're also working in Lawrence. I can find out more about that for you.
That's Flansburgh.
That would be great for our finance committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Good
Mayor
job.
Garcia had to go pick
Good
up his
topic.
doctor, but I'm sure he would love to be involved in any conversation that comes up with any sort of alternate funding potential. I know that I think we had discussed in a side meeting about potential grants and other fundings, but I think it was discussed that if we come up with too much alternate funding, then the MSBA won't want to give us as much money. So it's almost that catch-22 of positioning yourself too good and not good enough, right? We got to stay somewhere in that middle ground and almost secure the funding from them first and then try to supplement it on the city side. I
Well,
mean, James is obviously an expert there.
The one thing I'll say about this is they're not funding your feasibility costs.
Right.
If there is a way, and it's none of their business. It's probably someone from the MSBA watching this. It probably shouldn't be any of their business. You know, I don't know, but it strikes me that that would be if we're actually doing quite a bit of work in different communities with ARPA funding. We have a whole sort of advising group that's working on that. But it would be interesting to see whether you could apply the ARPA funds to the feasibility funds because they're completely outside of MSBA reimbursement.
How much is a feasibility study probably again? What would the range be? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Whitney, what was the number that you had come up with that was the basis of the
I
appropriation?
don't know, but I don't want to be wrong.
1 to 1.5.
Okay.
Million.
Keeping in mind the city's already approved that funding, so if we
475 was a reappropriation for the resurrected project for designer and OPM to get us to the next phase.
And then feasibility is next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was based on an understanding between Answer, Margaret's company, and Jones Whitstead, previous architect.
Yeah, and that was before the MSBA asked.
Subject to revision if we change our mind in regards to pursuing the different.
And the city's already appropriated the money, so if we can find a way to reimburse the city through other lending sources, and that's money that can be put back into the actual project from the city side.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I'll mention it to Mayor Garcia.
Well, it'll be a ban for now. It'll be a bonding authorization once the dust settles. So you'll have time to maneuver.
Awesome. Thanks for the suggestion, whoever brought that up.
Yeah, that's a really good
That's
comment.
huge.
Yeah. All right, let's see here. So review next steps from the last meeting and other notes. So we have minutes to approve from October 6th. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Palomar.
Second.
All right, I'll go with Mr. Lubold on the motion and Mr. Collmore on the second. You can just.
It was Tallman.
Oh, it was Peter Tallman. I apologize. Now keep in mind we have voting members and non-voting members. So of the voting members, do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll just let you raise your hands either visually or digitally. I see all yeses. Does anybody not approve the minutes? Please unmute and speak. All right, thank you, everyone. So keeping in mind our meeting schedule has amped up. So our next meeting is Tuesday, November 3rd, and then Tuesday, November 17th. And Margaret, if you can just remind people of the dates for interview process.
I think they're actually at the bottom.
Margaret, I can.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. They're down there. Sorry.
Yeah, they're at the bottom of the agenda, but deadline for questions is tomorrow. Deadline for proposals is 10/27 at 3 p.m. You'll get the proposals on 10/28. That gives us a little bit less than a week to review them. And we'll discuss them on the Thursday 11/3 meeting. And then we'll do interviews on Thursday 11/17. So
the interviews will take place of our 11/17 meeting, correct? It won't be a meeting and interviews?
Yes.
That's correct. And I
usually
also
approximately an hour per interview, right?
So I wanted to bring this up. So I would like, we can confirm this at the next meeting, but I would like to propose that we start earlier that day,
Yeah.
because the best would be that we have the 2 or 3 interviews. I mean, let's assume it's 3, and then the committee has about 45 minutes afterwards to have a discussion. We
Okay.
do not have to decide that day, but I think it's really good when you're fresh off hearing these discussions to
So I'd like to suggest that we start at 5, and those of you who are concerned with the time restraint, maybe what we do is start with Jones Whitsitt. I'm sorry, is that their name? The current designer that we had originally. Maybe we start with them because there's a certain level of familiarity, and then we proceed to the newer designers who we might have a little bit more in-depth questions for.
So you might actually want to do Jones Whitsitt last, and I'll tell you why, because I think you're going to end up for the sort of it's the same concept, but the inverse. I think there are things that are going to come up on these other projects you're not familiar with that you may want to then say, well, we saw in this other design, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's fair. So if everyone can just do their best to try to be on for 5 o'clock that day. And if you can't be here right at 5, just join as soon as you can. As you've seen, Miss Linville takes amazing notes.
Amazing.
So if you're late, you can just scroll up and gather the notes you've missed, or certainly catch up after.
Yeah, it's so good what she does here. It's amazing.
All right. Well,
Happy to relinquish the responsibility to anybody.
Good jump on that.
Yes.
I gotta go.
Is the discussion afterwards like an executive session or anything? Is if we're talking about somebody or strategy?
Well, so it can be. You can choose to do it that way.
Yeah, I
mean,
just don't know the protocol on this. I'm just asking. I don't know one way or the other.
I will say that generally, and I think based on what we heard in the community before, it's better if we do it on camera. And it means that it makes it a little bit harder in the sense that it can be hard for people to say, well, I didn't really like this, or I didn't really like that. It's much easier to say, well, I love this and I love that, but it's actually this piece of the ways in which a firm or a design is not a good fit for you. It's actually what the MSBA really wants to hear. They want to understand your thinking about it. So, and I think it's important for the public to, if they in the world of conspiracy theorists, right? Anything that happens that's not sort of fully public is a problem. And I would not start out with something as important as this decision and not do it on camera.
Okay.
All right. Miss Linville, did we need to review all of the stuff at the bottom of the agenda?
No, those are just notes that I linked to from up above.
All right. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to discuss, comments, concerns, anything at all before we adjourn? I would like to thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to those who took the time to submit questions ahead of time. I can't reiterate the importance of doing the pre-work and studying the materials in advance, so that way we're able to have such great open dialogue during our meetings. So thank you all for the time. I know that it's a huge commitment, especially moving forward as our schedules amp up. But think about the potential outcome for our community, and it's going to be so worth it. So thank you all for your time. And if we have nothing else to discuss, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's moved by Mr. Lubold, seconded by Peter Tallman. If there's any discussion on the motion, seeing none, I will take a show of hands to approve the adjournment. That's it. All positive. Is there anybody who thinks that we don't need to adjourn yet? Seeing none. All right. Meeting is officially adjourned at 7:35 p.m. Thank you again, everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Great. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Did the adjourning motions?